Hey, what's up, everybody? It's MGTOW Gamer here, back again, just with a brief discussion on the future of Magblade. I know the developers are looking to make some significant changes. Excuse me, I see, once again, developers making some very sweeping changes to the way Magblade plays. I know they're buffing Lotus Fan, which is great. They're going to be buffing the dot from Lotus Fan by what the patch note says by 175%. So that dot there at the bottom, that 3260, it's going to get buffed. It's going to do 1.75 times damage. That's great. Hey, the reason why I don't use a gap closer as a melee Magblade, the build that I'm on right now is not my melee build. I'll link my melee build that I play fairly often. This is more of a tank-oriented utility build that I created for the Nightblade with a Frost Staff. Anyway, so like I was saying, the reason that I don't use a gap closer like Lotus Fan is it's 2 points. One, it is entirely too expensive over the course of a fight to waste an ability slot simply just to gap close. The reason being is the only other thing that the gap close does is it puts a dot on your character, and again, you're fighting as a melee Magica build, and I play my melee Magica build without a damage shield. I play without a damage shield, and I typically only play with Swallow Soul and Siphoning for my heals. So, like I said, I'll post a link up above. You can take a look at my gameplay. I play primarily in Battlegrounds because I got tired of the lag in Cyrodiil. Really enjoy Cyrodiil. I really enjoy Battlegrounds. Is primarily what I focus on as a PvPer. And so most of the builds that I create are from the Battleground perspective of no CP. I feel Battlegrounds are fairly balanced. When you get obviously balanced matches in terms of the number of players, it's very rare that I end up in these face roll sort of matches. Usually pretty good, so I'm an advocate for people who are enjoying PvP. Please join Battlegrounds. I play in PCNA. So like I said, typically my only source of healing is from Swallow Soul, and as well as whatever I get from Siphoning, my potion, and then of course my HP regen. But with that said, going back to the reason I don't run Lotus Fan on my build is because, in my opinion, you don't need it, because the only thing that you need is Cripple, because Cripple will give you the major expedition. It'll slow your opponent, root them for a second, so it allows me on the build that I play, and I'll show you exactly what I mean on how I play my melee Magblade. I will kind of soften or look for what I perceive as a soft target, which is what I feel the developers are looking for. Like the Nightblade is designed as that single target, get behind the lines, get a quick kill, and move your way out. So the reason I don't like the gap closer is because the gap closer announces, hey, here I am. It's a real quick way to get yourself noted really quickly. Which is one of the reasons I don't like it. So I typically will trade from range. I'll hit my target with a light attack Swallow Soul, light attack Cripple. I make sure my structured entropy is up, and then I'll immediately switch. If that person is a little soft, I'll immediately switch over to my back bar, because my only source of stunning characters is with concealed from stealth. So I'll immediately use Shadowy Cloak, because that I feel that top target is a little soft. I'll go in, cloak real quick, get the stun from stealth, hit him with a Soul Harvest, and then continue working in the combo to gain the kill really quick. So in my opinion, I don't need the gap closer, because in essence, Cripple is my gap closer. That's how I perceive this ability. I use it more as a buff. I make sure that my buff Swallow Soul is up and that my buff Cripple is up for the movement speed to engage my target. Sure, it does fairly decent damage, but it really isn't what I'm using to spam on people. I don't spam Cripple. I really just use it both as an offensive buff and as a defensive buff. I use it to engage my target, and then when I'm being overrun by multiple opponents, I will use it to root and quickly gain the momentum and move my way out of situations. For example, if I were to get hit by like a Stamsork with his Hurricane, you know, fully out, you know, at maximum size, I'll cripple him and I'll quickly move and disengage and try to get behind him so that I'm waiting for him to recast his Hurricane so that it allows me to move in and out a little bit more freely than, of course, when it's at its maximum size. Same thing when you're fighting a Warden and you think he might have his ult up and he's going to use his Northern Storm. I'll quickly root and move out of the storm because it gives me that slightly movement speed between the 4 seconds of Major Expedition, the extra 25% that you get when you're cloaked, and of course on that particular build that I play with the Steed and I play with 2 pieces of Divine, so that gives me an extra 11% movement speed. So that's why I don't use that ability to close the gap, because Cripple in essence does the exact same thing, but it does it better, and it does it cheaper, and it does more damage. It does something that Lotus Fan doesn't do, is that it doesn't announce that I'm behind you. So the only time that I want to engage my target is when I'm coming from concealed from stealth. So I'll use this, which is what I'm talking about. It's typically how, as a melee Magblade, which is another reason why, as a Magblade, especially as a melee Magblade, I don't use Reaper's Mark. I use it on this build because this is more of a utility build, so it's more to help my teammates to do more damage and of course for that big heal. But from my perspective, or from the perspective of any player who is good, or even, you know, once you put Reaper's Mark or Piercing Mark on your target, it's like an announcement. Hello, I'm here. You can't see me, but this is me announcing that I'm here. And then it puts that person on the defensive end, which is why almost no Magblade probably uses this ability, because that's simply what it does. So maybe if you're a Destro Resto Magblade, you don't particularly care, because you're trading from rain. The moment you think you're going to become pressured, you'll just cloak and then move away, or some of them will use like Shadowy Image, which I don't use. I don't feel, even as a melee Magblade, that I need, because Cripple in essence does everything that I need from this ability. Sure, it does. Even if it didn't have the dot, I wouldn't care, because I don't need it for the dot. In essence, it's a better gap closer because it allows me to both engage as well as disengage, which is what this ability does not do. This in essence forces you to engage, and then you have no escape mechanism. The only thing that you'll be forced to do is now you're forced to run Shadowy Image, because you have no way to disengage from opponents or to disengage from fights where you might become overwhelmed, which is why I feel that that change is really a bad change for a melee Magblade. I would never run Lotus Fan, even with the buff to the dot. The buff to the dot is going to be something about 1300 damage on my spec, right? I run about 3400 spell damage with almost 31,000 max Magica in light armor with about 38% spell crit. That ability is going to do about 1300 damage per tick, right? It ticks 4 times over the course of, I believe, 6 seconds, because it has an initial hit and then has a 2-second delay before it begins the dot. So either what it does, because I haven't tested it on the PTS, how they've changed the dot mechanics. So either it's going to do the upfront damage, pause, and then your 8-second dot is going to apply. It could work that way. The reason, in my opinion, that that does not work for the melee Magblade is the melee Magblade is designed for burst, just like the Stamina Blade. You're not going in there trying to whittle your opponent down over the course of 8+ seconds. You're trying to go in, burst, and get out, which is why the change to this ability, as well as I believe there's another ability that they buffed the dot on. I mean, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's why, in my opinion, I would never use this, because I'm not there trying to slowly whittle down my opponent. I'm trying to burst them down as quickly as possible. The other change that they made, of course, is to Merciless. I really don't, in essence, feel that the removal of the 8% is fine. I'm not worried about them removing the Minor Berserk. In my experience, it should have been removed probably just from Relentless, because it's Stamblade that overperforms in PvP, not Magblade. In my opinion, even I rarely see a lot of good Magblades that are securing a lot of kills or doing a lot of damage. But most of the ones that I see rely on procs like Colorians or Colorians and Zons. It's very rare that I run into uh, a Magblade that I'm worried about, because typically they rely heavily on Cloak and damage shields, and it just screws up their rotation in terms of being able to do a lot of quick successful burst damage. At least on PC and NA, I've been playing no CP Battlegrounds literally since they came out, and only Battlegrounds. I don't do open world anymore. I stopped because I was tired of the whole horse simulator. A lot of times you waste a lot of time in between fights, so I was like, you know what, I get a lot of uptime in my PvP from Battlegrounds, so I stuck to that and I enjoyed it. That's why I make builds for it. I'm not sure if they removed the Minor Berserk from a PvE perspective. That seems kind of pointless, because in PvE you'll just get the buff from your healer anyway, so I don't see why the need to remove it. If it's from a PvP perspective, it should have just been removed from Relentless, because it's Stamblade that overperforms, because it's Stam that overperforms. Stam, in essence, is slightly above Magica in my opinion, and it's primarily because of dual wield and bleeds, and of course because you can stack more weapon damage. There are more sets for stacking weapon damage than there are for stacking spell damage. The other reason I feel that it overperforms is because of the weave. And that's where melee Magblade is much weaker when it's, in essence, trading with a Stamina Nightblade, is primarily in the weave. And so that's why, in my opinion, it should have been removed from Stamblade to decrease the gap between the weave. And I'm talking about the dual wield weave. The reason I run dual wield is, one, both it's thematic, but more importantly, you are more susceptible to having your stamina as a melee Magblade pressured than you are as a Destro Resto build. Which is why I feel that, in essence, that would be the buff or the nerf to Stamina Nightblade, so that Magica Nightblade, in essence, can compete a little bit more with its stamina version. And of course, in my opinion, you know, in terms of who can cloak more, you might think it would be melee Magblade, but in my opinion, Stamina Nightblade just does that cloak dodge roll far better, because they're working with typically higher stamina pool and higher stamina regen. So that allows them to utilize, of course, they also don't need a target to gain major expedition, because most Stamblades use bow on their back bar, and of course they gain a lot of momentum. Once they dodge roll, they've already got major expedition, and then they can cloak. So they avoid all the damage from when they dodge roll, and immediately pop into cloak. As a melee Magblade, my version of that is with Cripple. The moment I need to disengage because maybe another opponent came into the picture, or especially in battlegrounds, maybe another team is coming in my direction, and so that root and then that burst of speed allows me to disengage because I don't typically have the option to dodge roll cloak because of the smaller stamp pool. I do run a very high stamina region on my melee Magblade. I'm typically sitting with a pot just shy of 1500. And of course, that's also why I run dual wield, is for the heavy attack stamina returns, and of course for having the ability to run two different glyphs for two different purposes. And that's why I kind of like that. Sure, you will lose out a little bit on the weave damage from running like a Destro. Your ability damage will be just about the same, if not better. In my opinion, it's actually better running dual wield when you create a build, because you'll have more spell damage on that bar, and you also gain the 6% to your abilities. So Destra only gives you 8%, so really what you're missing out on is the weave. In dual wield, you can still gain a little bit more from your weave by making sure you take the dual wield expert, because the weave is based on your, of course, your weapon damage, your weapon critical, and so things like while dual wielding increases the damage with dual wield abilities by characters who are under 25%. That includes your light attacks. I'm not sure if a lot of you players knew that. When the person is below 25%, your dual wield heavy and light attacks increase by 20%. Right? Obviously, the more weapon damage you have, the stronger your weaves are going to be. So in essence, it's just particularly to increase every little bit that you can squeeze out of your melee attacks. Which is why I take these 3 points. Most people probably only take these, but even Ruffian works, which of course gives you 50% more damage when your target is stunned, right? I.e. when I'm coming out of Cloak with a concealed, and then I immediately either light attack or come in with a heavy attack follow-up to make sure that both my glyphs are procced, which is typically what I do from Cloak. I will automatically wind up a heavy attack and immediately cancel that heavy attack with a concealed. It all goes up at the same time, and it gains the damage bonus because it'll stun and register the stun prior to the actual heavy attacks landing. Same thing, so you'll gain the 15% extra damage, of course, when you cripple your target and then they're rooted, right? So now you're doing an extra 50% while the person is rooted for that 1.5 second duration. And then, of course, if they're rooted and below 25%, so then you're doing that 15 plus you're doing an extra 20%, of course, with your light and heavy attacks at that point. Which is why a lot of times you'll see me do that, where I'm like light attack, animation conceal, bash on my when characters are getting low, and that's typically just eke out as much weapon damage from my actual weapons that I'm using when the person is low, so that I don't have to go to my back bar, because I view my back bar primarily as a buff bar when it comes to Swallow Soul, Cripple, and of course using structured entropy. The other change that they're implementing, in my opinion, is to Dark Cloak, and they were making a change to increase the duration of minor protection, which doesn't make sense because it was a really strong heal. They're actually nerfing the shit out of this heal, and it will become next to useless next patch, because you really don't use it necessarily for the minor protection. It's really to give you a quick burst heal. It's basically like the Magica comparison of kind of vigor. You need to have roughly around 25k HP to make pretty good use of this ability. The developers want Magblades to use Path of Darkness for the expedition. This, in my opinion, is a huge mistake because it is a huge tell of where the Nightblade is, or where the Nightblade in the direction that you're going, because you're going to use the major expedition. In my experience, in my opinion, having you're having so many abilities that are just doing one thing. Like, this is my one thing. I just use it for expedition. I use this to disengage. I use this to cripple. You're stuffing too many things on your bar, and they're literally only to do one thing. It doesn't make sense. Where it's like, what Cripple does, you don't need to have Path of Darkness or Lotus Fan. But with the changes, now I need to make room on my bar for two shitty abilities that I don't want to use, and that in my opinion are not worth using, because I don't want to gap close to an opponent, have no way out. Now I don't have no way out. Now I'm forced to use Shade. Shade is buggy as fuck. I never used it. I never would use it because of how good Cripple is. They could use and make Shade into something else. You could use Shade kind of like After Image. You can make Shade, like, for example, if you've played what's it called, Apex Legends, and I forgot that character where he kind of like throws out a clone of himself. Like, you could have done something like that, in essence, to throw people off of where you were, or numerous things. The other change that they're implementing is to the other change to Cripple is that Debilitate is now going to offer the minor Magica steal, which Magblade doesn't need. It has so many other passive. Their abilities are fairly cheap, especially things like Siphoning Soul already return Magica. So then, like, what's the point of having both abilities that in essence do very similar things? Nightblade is not starved for resources. I don't know why the developers feel that they need to keep on adding things that already do the same thing, right? Which is what their point is. In essence, both of these, one does a heal and a Magica or stamina return, and then one does a little damage over time with a minor root and a slow attached to it. I wish they would get a game designer that was a little bit more PvP oriented. And of course, all of these changes are for PvP. They don't necessarily affect PvE, because you're not really worried about rooting your opponent or gaining the expedition, because you're not closing the gap. Typically, most people aren't playing melee Magblade in open world. Excuse me, in an overworld, not open world. So I'm hoping that they would make some change. In my opinion, melee Magblade really didn't need a change. It works, in my opinion, just fine. I play it really well. Play it to the point where I don't need a damage shield. I run full light armor, and I don't even use like the heal from like Steadfast Ward or Rapid Regen. I don't use Panacea, and I find that the build, the class, works just fine. It's very successful, does a lot of damage. The only thing that I felt that it needed was a little buff to the weave, and the way that they could have done that was just decrease the weave from Stamblade, and in essence to close the gap between the two comparisons, between the melee Magblade and then the melee Stamblade. Otherwise, the class plays absolutely fine. I really enjoy it. Hopefully they will reconsider, because I feel this is and all the other changes that they want to make, I feel that this is the only real change that it will affect melee Magblade, is where are you going to get your expedition. The expedition, because the only thing that's going to happen is you're going to end up having to take something out to run, for example, I don't even have it, Sigic Order, what is it, that time ability, I forget what's it called, where it's going to give you immunity to root and slows. which is nice. I typically don't have a problem. That's why I run Nord. Most of the root scenarios that you're going to run into are going to be Frost, which is why I ran and built a Nord a while back, because in Battlegrounds there was just so many Frost Wardens spamming ice, so many other people, and using different builds with, backbarring, Path of Ice. And so I was like, you know what, let me make a melee Magblade that is not going to have that problem. Of course, back then we had the health regen, which I prefer over the new stalwart with the 5 ultimate every 10 seconds. Sure, it's nice. I would much rather have the 20% HP regen. And of course, the physical increase is nice, because then if you wanted to run a percent reduction, kind of like from Bolstering Darkness or Veil of Blades, the major protection, of course, isn't cut by much when using the minor protection, which you get from running Dark Cloak. With that said, in my opinion, melee Magblade is in a really good spot. I have no problems with healing. I'll leave a clip from some of my previous Battlegrounds so you can check out my build. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Check me out on Twitch at MGTOW Gamer. I stream fairly regularly, typically in the nighttime, because I work at night, so I'm used to sleeping during the daytime. Feel free to check me out. I appreciate it. If you have any build suggestions or something that you're interested in playing in, you're having a hard time, feel free to hit me up in the comment section. Take care, and God bless.